But if you're going to say men prefer women who don't know what they're doing, I'm just saying, like, you can look online and see men talk about this all the time.
So let's dive into this real quick then. Let's find out, and we'll test your logic and see if that's true. You're requesting empirical data as the burden of evidence for whether or not this can be demonstrated to you, which I think is fair. But what if we could logically demonstrate it for you? That's also another way in which a thing can be demonstrated to a person that does not require empiricism, correct?
It depends on the topic. You can't I don't think you can apply that to any argument stance.
Well,
if you're going to speak on behalf of other men, it needs to be studied. Their
empiricism itself is just a foundational ethos of I believe X. So, like, you would have to justify why we should even use empiricism. But that aside,
okay.
Yeah. I mean, hang on, you would. But I'm just going to grant that maybe we could, as long as you'll grant that I could also logically demonstrate something to you as well. Because you'd have to logically demonstrate why we should use empirical data. I'm just going to grant that we should. But if I can logically demonstrate for you, for instance, that most of the world is religious. Most of the world is religious, not some. And most of the religions of the world have some kind of virtue ethic when it comes to sex. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely.
Well, then there must be some preference for promiscuity
Does that mean they uphold
being
it,
bad
though?
from the position of both men and women.
I mean, you could also argue that someone who is promiscuous is probably more fertile. You could really dive into that on all kinds of levels.
That does not contend with my argument that I just gave you at all.
Okay, but
so
that would
most
be to
of the world
assume
is
that
religious,
right, but
and most religions. Stop. Let me make the argument again,
okay.
And then steelman the argument before you respond to it.
Okay.
The argument is, if most of the world is religious, most religions have a sexual ethic which is against promiscuity, which they do. Then it seems that people must have some preference against sexual promiscuity. That would be a sound conclusion. Can you steelman the argument first and then give me an argument counter to it?
I think what you're saying is valid, but I think that not everyone who's religious upholds religious values by far. By far.
There are outliers.
That's a non sequitur. What's the argument?
The argument is that until there's actual data saying what men prefer, then all of this is just hypothetical bullshit.
It can't be hypothetical. We have empirical data on religion.
When was religion
empirically
formed?
That most of the world is religious.
Right.
We know that empirically.
When was religion formed? You have to take into context society at the time that it was formed.
Why do we have to do that when we're talking about modernity?
Because we don't live in that climate anymore. We don't live in that climate anymore.
No. That's a genetic fallacy. What are you talking about? That's a fallacious form of argumentation.
People who
Why would we
created the
have to go to when a religion was formed to make a determination that right this second, most of society is religious? In most societies of the world have some kind of religion they adhere to with sexual ethics which are against promiscuity. Therefore, there must be some preference against promiscuity, unless you can give me a counter argument to that.
I'm not saying that there's not a preference. I'm saying, and most of the people that would be in favor of women who are more experienced are not going to be religious to begin with. So you're adding all these variables.
That's not a counter argument.
They're kind of cucks, to be honest.
I mean, I don't
That's
disagree.
not a counter argument. Like, what's the counter argument to it? Some people might not be religious. I know. I'm granting that. That's
right, but you're
right?
trying to add in a bunch of variables that may not be applicable in today's society. I don't know very many people who have said things along the lines of I prefer a woman who's more experienced that are religious.
Most of the people in the world do not live in Western societies. Most do not.
Okay, so are we having a world debate or an American culture debate?
We're talking about Muslims, and we're talking about Jews, and we're talking about Christians, and we're talking about all sorts of different religions which exist. There's almost in all of them an ethic against sexual promiscuity. Almost all of them.
If we're talking about the whole world, then yeah, that's absolutely fair.
Against promiscuity, right?
Yeah, if we're talking worldwide, yeah, that's fair.
Yeah.
So
Well, I mean, you don't think that human beings evolved? You don't think that men? The ontological nature of what is a man in a Muslim nation is different than the ontological nature of a man here, right? I mean, they're the same. They're both men.
I think
so. Why would they have a preference there? Distinct from a preference here. For all of us who are religious, seem to have this preference, and most people are religious.
There's multiple factors that go into a person's decision making, and religion is not the only thing. There are social aspects, generational aspects, and are you arguing that what things are like in Egypt right now are similar to America? Are you saying the culture?
No, there's going to be a cultural. Of course, there's going to be cultural distinctions between them, but the religions can be uniform even absent culture. So, for instance, Muslim religion in Africa could be exactly the same religion which is followed in the middle of Qatar, whatever, right?
Sure.
The point is yeah, we can even take into account these cultural considerations, but if most of the world is religious, and you agree that it is, and we can empirically demonstrate that, you empirically know that that's true, then I don't understand how I haven't given you a good logical demonstration.
Because we also know
it
that
seems
religion
that
is
most people
on
are
the-
against promiscuity.
There are less and less religious people as time goes on. Like we
Only
can't,
in the
we
West.
Can't pretend. Okay, so I live in the West, so that's what I'm debating.
Yeah, but
I already
so
gave
what?
you. I already gave you the. If we're considering the whole world, then absolutely that's fair. But if
Yeah.
we're talking about American culture, I just don't think it's fair to say that most men want a woman who's a virgin or inexperienced.
Most people in the United States identify with a religion. Most.
Okay, well, you would. I mean, if you
Yeah,
would,
you're
if you have
talking about
stats on
somewhere
that, then-
between 19 and 30% who self-ID as agnostic or atheist, and even those people will often identify as being culturally Christian. So the thing is that if that's true even here, the majority of people even here, and the immigrants which come into the country, come in usually with a religious background. South America, especially, they're Catholic. If they're coming in from the East, they're Muslim. Or they're
But there's
Orthodox
many other
Christians or
religions.
this
Okay,
kind of thing.
there's even Christian sects that allow polygamy, and then there's all
There's
the
very
different
few.
sects of paganism that don't
There's
give a
very
shit
few,
about
and the
things
West
like
does
that.
not allow polygamy. It's not only illegal; it's considered
Okay,
immoral.
okay,
And the
so
Christian polygamists are not allowed to be polygamous.
Okay, maybe not legally, but you want to act
No,
like
not
Mormons
even
don't
not
have
even
multiple.
spiritually.
Is it legal in Nevada?
No, it's not legal to be a polygamist in Nevada.
Okay,
Wait, so
There's
let me
other
ask you a
religions
question. Let me
at
ask
play,
you a question here. Do you think that men are thinking, I like her, but I would like her more had she fucked more men before me?
no, I don't think it's a matter of that. I just think sometimes guys want a woman who's more experienced, and unfortunately, they're not
No.
going to find that in a virgin.
Okay,
That doesn't
I would
mean that she
argue
had to
the
have fucked,
men,
like, 50
the men
people.
that want. First off, let's be real here. Most pussy is good pussy. It's really not hard, all that hard. Sex isn't this complicated procedure, especially as a woman. For women to be good in bed, it really doesn't take much. So this idea that the more sexual partners you've had, that also, actually on that note, wouldn't you argue that a woman who's had one partner, but she's had sex with that partner 1,000 times, is going to be more sexually experienced than the woman who
guess
slept
it would
with
depend on how
100
experimental he
men
is.
one time each?
There's
Who's
so
gonna
many.
be-
There's so many variables to this. How experimental is that one couple? If they're doing the same shit every time, then they're not really. She's not getting a lot of experience.
Okay,
You know, the one of the kind of cheap shots that's often used by pure empiricists is this idea of a multifaceted variables making the thing so complex that we can't actually make any deductions from it or inductions from it. But the truth is that correlates. There's usually primary correlates, and then there's kind of non-primary correlates. We still can look at primary correlates here when we're looking at data,
Yeah.
right? You
Right.
would agree that that's true. So
Yes.
just kind of waving it off and saying, hey, there's tons and tons of variables. Nobody's going to dispute that there's tons of variables, but there's still going to be prime correlates that we can look at. And that's what Brian's kind of pointing to, is these prime correlates.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I'm not saying that it's not a lot of men who would prefer to be with a virgin or someone who has a lower body count. I'm just saying you can't put this broad generalization on everyone, because even on social media, you can read through hundreds of comments of men saying the opposite. So I'm just saying objectively, until there's like
we're
a
not saying
recent study.
that these men don't exist. But
Okay.
generally speaking, if we're having a converse, we could talk about the dating
I don't know how
habits
general
of
it is.
dwarfs.
I guess it would
I'd be
depend on
happy
the
to look. You
age
want
group
to talk
that you're
about
talking
the
to.
specific dating habits of dwarves who live in Ecuador. We can talk about it if you want. But if we're speaking about just generalities here, we can arrive at some generalities. And generally speaking, men prefer sexual purity in women.
Maybe the
just,
men
like-
in the study.
I
What
just
study?
like I'm just
It
telling
does-
you,
I
like
think I
among
need
our
that
age
from-
group,
I
don't
need
think
not
that's the
even look
case.
at a study to make this determination.
Everyone's going to have their own
Brian, the
anecdotal
voice
Yes,
experiences.
of
men.
course,
and
there are.
and I'm
there are
telling
men,
you, in
fine.
our age group,
Yeah, there's a
in
lot
our
of
age group,
sure.
there's
a bunch
large
of
portion of men who prefer women who are more experienced. So,
No?
so it's not
Okay,
as
do you think
relevant
it's
to them
Here, let's talk
how
about
many
something more
partners they
simpler
have.
then. Do you think it's a majority of men that prefer women with a lot of sexual experience?
I mean, I don't know. That's the whole point, is that I don't know.
You don't know. Okay, so then,
I wouldn't feel confident in saying yes.
so just to be clear, if a high body count is proxy for promiscuity, do you think a man would prefer to date a woman who hasn't had sex in a year, or let's say date and sleep with? He'd prefer to sleep with a woman who hasn't had sex in a year, or a woman who fucked a guy an hour ago.
Well, yeah, for sure.
Okay. What about a day ago?
I mean, some men don't give a but for the most part, yeah, I think
You don't
that
think
you
men
wouldn't
have
prefer that.
a disgust response
I
to a
think-
woman who's recently fucked another guy?
This is what I can tell you from having been a dancer when I was younger.
Hold on, let me ask
and
you a
done-
question. Didn't earlier you said that you wouldn't date a bi guy?
Yes.
Why?
For multiple reasons.
Because he recently had sex with another man, right?
Well, that was y'all's topic, but yes.
Okay.
Yeah, no, and again, my value system is very similar.
But do you have like a kind of a, what was your response to your refusal to dating a bisexual man?
I want a
Was
man
it a disgust response? There's not a disgust. No, didn't you say like?
I want someone who's
hold on,
attracted to me
was the
and what
one,
I am.
Who was the one who said it would be gross because he just, maybe it was you. I forgot.
It wasn't me.
It was you?
Not
Okay.
me.
All right. But you would.
But I understand that perspective, yeah.
Right. So
no, so
that
like I absolutely
feeling.
validate that. I'm just telling you, like from my experience, having done OnlyFans when I was younger, being a dancer when I was younger, most men don't care as much as y'all would like to pretend.
No,
they
not
do.
most men.
I've never had a
Where's
man
your
ask.
Where's your
Literally
study
never.
for that?
I said it was anecdotal experience.
Oh,
As
well
having
then I'm
been
just
a-
going to
I'm
anecdotally
sure,
dismiss it.
and as I was trying to get at the point earlier, is that men probably have a preference for attractive women that happen to not be virgins. Now,
What?
because I was
She's saying it probably
alluding to the fact that
they
a
care
lot of
less
attractive
about
women are
who they
not going to
fucked
be
and-
virgins.